Hey, Peter, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Jack, honestly, it's a pleasure to be on the show. It's been a long time. We've been trying to arrange this for a little while.
It has, but we're here. What better topic to talk about than safety?
I'm biased. I would say so.
I mean, I'm biased too. I spend a lot of my time looking at ways we can combine the world of health and safety with digital technology and everything. So hopefully the conversation doesn't disappoint. But why don't we start with just a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, awesome. My name's Pete Thomas. I'm a safety professional. I've worked in safety for, I'm not sure, well over a decade. And there's been some issues in safety that I've seen for a little while, particularly around collaboration, data, the finances behind safety, these things that we don't tend to talk about, but they really interested me. And I saw this wave of digital transformation coming for our industry, right? Over the last couple of years, AI, there's a lot more technology. And I started to get quite interested in it. So I set up my safety tech podcast. And eventually that's led to me working with Intuety. And Intuety is an AI risk assessment platform, but it's just so much more. It just gets me so excited because it's this ability to pull so much data into a system and then just have effectively AI, like your just phenomenally intelligent peer review friend, that when you try to put something out there, like a risk assessment, it does a review of that risk assessment against all of the available regulations, the guidance, whatever it is, depending wherever you are in the world as well, all of your company policies and procedures, all of your lessons learned, and it will pull that in and go, hang on, have you thought about this? Why haven't you recommended this? What about this control measure? And that for me is just something that was, when I saw it as a product, just really excited me. And I knew that was where I had to be in my career.
That's it. And one of the most important elements to health and safety is this idea of what have you learned and learning from these events. I mean, unfortunately, work in an industry where we're never going to be able to eliminate, say, safety incidents down to zero.
Yep.
Hopefully as close to as possible, but there's always going to be a nature of risk here and there because of the nature of the work that we do within the world of capital infrastructure and construction. But then the thing that is entirely in our power is this idea of learning from what has happened. And I think that's one of the really interesting things that stands out to me with Intuity, this ability to actually look at our risk assessments and learn from what's happened before and try and build up that sort of deep knowledge to continually make our sites and projects even safer.
Yeah, this is the thing. So in safety, we work on the continual improvement cycle, right? It's like plan, do, check, act, we call it. That's our HSG 65, the Deming cycle. I think it's been known as experiential learning cycle. It's got a million names, but you're right. It's continuous improvement. The issue is there's this paradox, right? Where the better that we get at identifying areas for improvement, the worse we get at implementing them. And you see this all the time with organizations. And you know, where something's gone wrong and someone's been hurt and the HSE come in and prosecute, there's almost like this, okay, it's happened once, but there are so many times when they'll dig back and they'll go, you did this 6 years ago. You made this same mistake 6 years ago. And it's like, why are we losing that lesson? Well, first of all, staff turnover. Staff don't stay in jobs for 6 years anymore. Staff leave jobs. Years ago, if I went to go and work in my local factory down the road, I would probably work somewhere where I could walk to work. I'd take my sandwiches in a pail or like a lunchbox or something, I don't know. And I would be there for 30 years, final salary, pension, and my kids would probably work there as well, right? That was the structure, but it's just not that way anymore. And people think that people are flighty and want to leave jobs all the time, but they're not. Companies change. Look at the FTSE 100 and the companies that were in it. Go back 30 years ago. So in our lifetime, the companies are completely different from what they were now. Companies change all the time. They go into liquidation. There's takeovers and everything. The point that I'm trying to make is that keeping hold of the knowledge is absolutely impossible. And the more lessons learned we have, the harder it is for someone new coming in to actually apply those lessons learned to the day-to-day, so we lose all that knowledge, right? So how do I record my lessons learned for this continual improvement? Do I put them all on an Excel spreadsheet? Where do I put them? And then each one of those Excel spreadsheets, right, you have a link to an accident investigation or a folder, right? I can come in as a safety professional, I can open 10 and I can go, okay, I won't make those same mistakes again. Can I open 100? What about 1,000? If you walk into a job and you've got 1,000 folders with information in it, are you going to be able to ingest all of that, understand it, and then apply it throughout all of your safety documentation? You're not. It's impossible. And if anything, the risk is that it becomes a bit of an own goal, in that the better that you are at it, when someone comes in and does some digging, they'll go, hang on, you had this in your lessons learned pile, right? And you're not doing anything with it. And that's where we absolutely have to embrace technology. And by the way, this is just for a company. And I've seen this time and time again. I see this with wind farms at the moment. GWO have compiled a list. I want to say it's about 15,000. Someone can shout at me if I got this wrong, right? Just email me, message me on LinkedIn. But I believe it's about 15,000 lessons learned. What do I do with that? If it's not in a searchable form, what do I do with it? When we have any major infrastructure projects in the UK, we will take the lessons learned and we will share them on the next part of the project, because ultimately we'll have a whole new supply chain, all new subcontractors, all new everything, project team, and we'll take the lessons learned and we'll put it on there. And these aren't just safety lessons learned; these are operational efficiencies, things that we could do better. And I've heard of organizations passing on 100,000 lessons learned onto the next project.
Wow.
Impossible.
Wow.
You would need just an almighty project team just to sit there and go through that and go, what's the good stuff here? What's the rubbish?
It's
do it without AI.
When it's at that scale, it only ever means that it's a box ticking exercise. And it's so difficult to really pull value from it. And I guess this idea of continual improvement and always this continual improvement point from your lessons learned and building on it and sharing it and learning from it over time really does represent what good looks like within the world of safety. What else does good look like when it comes to safety?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, on the same point as well, we're just talking about lessons learned within your organization. I know companies that are working on a project, an infrastructure project, they can't share lessons learned up and down the supply chain on the same project because it's commercially sensitive. So imagine you're the principal contractor on a site and you've got your contractors and then you've got your subcontractors, and it always goes down to the lowest sort of denominator within the organization. That person does something wrong. Are they really going to want to escalate that on their own initiative for fear of something affecting their pay, their contract, what they get? We don't even share lessons learned throughout the supply chain on the same project because of commercial sensitivities, concerns with the contract, but also GDPR and information security. I couldn't just say to you on one of your projects, here's this RIDDLE report. When you have to report a serious accident to the HSE, you submit a RIDDLE form. On that form, it's got the injured party's address, their telephone number, their date of birth, all of this stuff that's protected. So we can't share that. So when we're talking about data and lessons learned, I'm talking about big infrastructure projects. But if you're a small company and you have 5 accidents a year, what are you going to do with that? Like, anyone that does anything with data knows that 5 isn't a big enough sample size to do anything with, particularly not if they're all different types of accidents. It's just purely subjective opinion after that and anecdotal information. And so we have to work together on a collaborative scale to be able to get the data to keep making these continual improvements.
But also, you've raised a really interesting point, because if you look at the construction sector, I think the stat is that 99% of the market have less than 500 employees or so.
Yeah.
So like the majority of the market is small.
Yes.
So really that means that the majority of the market do not have enough visibility of these important lessons learned to be able to truly shift the sector as a whole. So it's a really interesting point that you've raised there.
We're getting into a whole different topic here, but I'd love to talk about it. But if you look at the workplace fatality numbers from the last HSE release, right, it's 138 fatalities in the UK. Shocking, really dreadful to think that 2 people a week die in work every single day in the UK, don't go home to their families, don't go home to their friends. It's a huge number, and it's something that we absolutely must do something about. But they will come out with these top line statistics, 50% in the construction industry, 50% from working at height, right? And then you go, okay, what does that mean? Are they working for a tier 1 contractor and they've fallen out the top of a crane, a tower crane? No laughing matter, by the way, but I'm just laughing because it doesn't happen, right? Or is it someone doing the guttering on your nan's house and they've climbed up a double extension ladder? Like, what are we talking here? And this is the difficult thing. They just go, it's the construction industry. And then your tier 1 contractors are like, oh my God, we've got to do more about people working at height. It's, what are we doing? Let's we'll focus on the scaffolding guys this year, right? Because scaffolding work, it makes sense. No, they're not falling off. It's not that. It's when you dive into the statistics, it's people that are working at one story or almost below, and they tend to be working in a domestic setting. So I guess there's just not enough data and there's not enough information provided. We haven't moved on. We're not using the intelligence that we need to. We're just taking snippets of bits and then we're trying to apply it broad brush across entire industries, and it just doesn't work.
And I guess that sort of point of the difference between, say, a major tier one working on an HS2 versus a sort of your local building company doing a minor extension.
Yep.
Those are two different worlds and they operate in two completely different hemispheres, really, but obviously sharing the same labels, sharing the same sort of like being tarred with the same brush. I guess what responsibility do we each have? Do you think we have a responsibility to share these lessons learned beyond our immediate vicinity and share them with the wider sector? What do you think that like responsibility looks like?
Do you know, I think it's for us to engineer the way that makes it easy for people to do it in a safe and secure way. And I think if you build it, they will come. If you produce the way for people to do it, it will work and people will just do it naturally anyway. Come on, let's just build the system to make it work and then people will sign up to it and they'll do it. I don't know. I want to come up with a stupid analogy. People should recycle more. We'll give them recycling bins and they will. Now we give people recycling bins and they recycle. We've made it easier. We've eliminated the barriers to providing this information. So at the moment, we've just got a lot of barriers, GDPR, commercial sensitivities, and all this lot. Now we have AI where you could upload lessons learned, you could upload this information, it's sanitized, it's clean. Anything that's secure gets ripped out of it. Company names, dates of birth, people, email addresses, whatever. And what we do is we share the lesson learned and the means that would have prevented that thing from occurring. That's what we are on the cusp of at the moment. And that's what we're working on within Intuety.
Yeah. And I guess conceptually, that makes complete sense, right?
Yes.
It's an absolute no-brainer that the industry needs. I'm really interested to dive into the drivers on why people should be doing this. There's the moral piece, which I think, unfortunately, health and safety gets tarred with in some way. There's this sort of big moral obligation to improve safety. But then actually, the reason to improve safety is so much more than the sticks. There are so many carrots and there's so many sort of incentives and real business reasons why this is so important as well. And I think it's so important to sort of recognize the full comprehensive picture of why health and safety is so important.
Yeah, I've worked in safety for a long time, and even I find it strange. But I just wrote a piece that's gone out in RSM magazine today, and I said that years ago I was sat outside the boardroom, and it always reminded me of The Apprentice. Lord Sugar will see you now. They deleted that bit out as well. They deleted any humour out of it, which I thought was really annoying because I quite like having a sense of humour in these things rather than sounding like AI's written it. It's a robotic thing. But anyway, I remember going in there and saying, look, can I have pounds X for an investment in safety? And they said, what are we going to get out of it? What's this? What's it going to improve? Can you quantify the improvement? What's the ROI? And they started coming out with these questions. And I'm like, it's great. I've got these wonderful moral arguments for this. You can't put a price on safety. And if you think safety is expensive, try having an accident. And all these other platitudes that we seem to have been coming out with since, 1974, and the Health and Safety at Work Act came out, right? And they just looked really unimpressed because I couldn't give them the numbers. And I challenge any safety professional at the moment to try and give them the numbers, and they can't. Unfortunately, it's where we are at the moment as a profession. And then I go and sit there in my little safety department and I look over at marketing and I look at the social media team, and they've got 8 people and they've just got funding for more because they can give them click-through rates, they can give them the analytics, they can give them the ROI, they can tell them the reach, they can tell them the demographics, like absolutely everything. But we can't in safety. And this is a huge issue. And I smile when you said about the moral argument, right? Because we've got the moral, legal, and financial. In safety, we love quoting the law. Section 2A of the Health and Safety at Work Act says, it's our favorite thing to do, but no one's impressed by it. There's lots of laws out there in business, and companies have to navigate those cautiously, and they're very good at it. That's why they have big legal teams. You've got the moral argument, and no company thinks that they're immoral. Like, no one sits out there. They think they're doing the right thing, but at the end of the day, it would also be considered immoral to go out of business and have to make everybody redundant. So you're balancing the harm there. One thing that we're just really crap at in safety is the financial. We are so bad at the financial, it's unbelievable. To the point where if I type on LinkedIn and say something about finances, people go, safety's not about the money. I'm like, everything in business is about the money. Surely that's not just me thinking that, right? It's like, of course it's about the money. And here's the thing that I was getting wrong. When we pitch something in safety, we're selling it. And when you sell something to someone, you have to look at who you're trying to sell to. Do you remember the old color codes for people? The red, blue, yellow, green. I can't remember what it is, like the driven, the motivate, whatever. The blue is the analytical, the green and the yellow. What's the board made up of? Red and blue. Who are the finance people on the board? And guess what they are? Analytical. Who's the one that's going to make the decision to sign off your funding for this safety initiative? The financial, blue, analytical. And what are we giving them? You can't put a price on safety in a moral argument. That might work for someone who's green, but it's not going to work for someone who's blue. They want to see the numbers, and we're not giving them the numbers. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I think this is so important is because if I went to most safety professionals and said, how much do you spend on safety? They wouldn't know. They'd have a budget. And I, by the way, I'm not being critical here. I hold my hands up. I've been in the same position for years. I'd have a budget. My budget would be like 20 grand. That's what I can buy, the odd bit of PPE and some signage with that. But is that what the company spent on safety? Not on your life. There's a study that came out of the US a couple of years ago that said companies are spending 7% of their turnover on safety. 7% of turnover.
7. Wow.
Right? Now, disprove me, because no one can, because we don't know. And I'll explain why. Because safety spend is made up of maintaining buildings, maintaining offices, maintaining plant, maintaining machinery. It's made up of safety training. So this is not just the consultancy or the e-learning courses, it's the operational downtime that you spend on that training. It's made up of, I don't know, external consultancy in your safety team, writing documentation and risk assessments and all of this sort of stuff. It all comes out of different budgets, right? If I say, look, can I have some money to provide some training? And the company goes, how much would it cost? Oh, we pay this guy $1,000. That's not the end of it, right? Because we've had the operational downtime for the staff to be trained. And it's not just their wages, because their wages aren't a true reflection of how much they cost. And that's not a true reflection of the impact on operational performance. This is really hard to quantify, but I really feel that we're going to be there within the next couple of years. And when someone walks into a boardroom and says, can I have £20,000 for this, against a backdrop of 7% of turnover, and if we can evidence the impact that it's going to have, and it's a completely different conversation.
It is. And I think when you break it down like that, you can think of the amount of time the industry, at least the sort of like the large major industry, will spend on, say, toolbox talks every month. And just that time will just accumulate at scale. But then I guess, so there's almost a route that you can imagine that you've described to defining the cost of improving health and safety. I am interested in that sort of return piece. So there's the legal piece you spoke about. Obviously, there's the moral, there's the feel-good one. But then that financial piece then. So if we know that, say, we're spending 7% of turnover on health and safety, I wonder what that sort of financial return of that 7% is.
Huge. I genuinely can't answer, Jack, but that's the question. This is the hypothesis. And by the way, that 7%, that was one company that had done some research, and there's so little published research on this. And even they said, who knows? Because there's nothing out there. We don't know. I'll give you another example. Say you do Legionella testing in a building like a hospital or something. It requires you to flush some water. So you have to flush the water through so the stagnation doesn't cause the growth of bacteria in the pipework. In order to do that, you've got the consultant that you've had to pay that's come out of one budget to tell you that you need to do some flushing. You've then got someone in maintenance that's got to walk around and actually go and flush these taps for however many hours or whatever on whatever frequency. That comes out of another budget. And then you've got the water itself in terms of the waste. and the cost of water that you're using, which will come out of a totally different budget. So no one ever quantifies it. But honestly, I think if we can get a grip of this, we can change safety from just being this, and I don't want to say feel good, because for me, like, it's an absolute critical necessity. But I do think it's about communicating at the right level and on the right topic in the right way. And that's what's going to really elevate safety within an organization from something that's seen as a nice to have at some time to something that's truly operationally critical.
So thinking about that sort of 7% then, so obviously that 7% investment at an organizational level or even a sort of a national level, as you described, is the input into health and safety. And then you have these outputs, and yes, the legal team might be happy. Yes, maybe the CFO's happy if we can track some financial benefits. Chief health and safety officer happy. But ultimately the sort of the true success test for health and safety investment is true behavior change. It's that sort of culture change. And it's that sort of point around, okay, how do we really shift the culture of an organization to being more safe? That's something I'm fascinated in. What do you see there?
So I think, interestingly, first of all, are we putting the 7% in the right place? You mentioned about toolbox talks before. When we look at our falls from height, does a toolbox talk on safe use of ladders actually prevent an accident, or does it not? How do we know? With the lack of the detail into the investigations of the accidents that we have and the lack of visibility over that research, it's just not really there. Then how do we know that toolbox talks actually works? Is that toolbox talk more of a, we've provided training and this is our tick in the box to show how we've done it? Or is it something that's truly preventative? And how much do we spend on that? And what's the efficacy of that? What's our return on that specifically? In terms of culture change, this is really interesting, right? So at the moment in safety, we've got a load of people saying the number of fatalities per year has plateaued, completely plateaued. It's, I think, back when I did my master's in 2017, it was about 147 fatalities per year. There was a little dip during COVID because less people working, and then it went back up again to 138. The number is coming down, but it's coming down very slowly and far too slowly for many. So what we're trying to do now is you'll see lots of different pockets in safety. Some are trying to chuck out all the old rules and say, we need to completely scrap this and we need to look at a completely new way. And I'm like, no. We've gone from 2,500 fatalities a year in a year in 1970s, and we've come all the way down. We are coming down, but the way I look at this is like a Formula One pit stop time. Formula One pit stop time is to get out a little sip of whiskey and a cigarette, 27 seconds, something like that. And then in the 1980s, it came down to 8 seconds, and now we're down to around 2 seconds. But you're not going to get it down to zero. And you're not going to drop it suddenly by 20% unless there's some major rule changes, right? These changes are going to be small and gradual. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is on the culture side, there's a lot of people that feel that culture is the way to go. It's about human performance. It's about individuals. But I'm just going to say it. I think we're almost splitting off in safety into various things. And I think the data and the financial and the tech side is going to be one of those splits. And I think the human performance side is going to be another. And then there's going to be more of a, I don't know, whatever side over there. But that it's not that I don't like it. I just recognize that it's a profession in itself. It's almost like psychology. Think about it from an engineering point of view. How do you measure safety culture? It's incredibly hard to measure quantitatively. It's very qualitative. It's very riddled with observation bias. Yeah.
Interventions.
Observation bias is rife in it. Who knows? Yeah. It's really challenging. Now, I know I will get some hate from I don't really care. There's a load of people that are into HOP and all this sort of stuff and safety differently and you view safety and safety too and all of these things. But I still think you've got to have the basics in place. And I think, if you can measure it, you can improve it. If you can't measure it, you're going to struggle. And this is why there was a piece of research that came out of the US a little while ago that said that safety culture doesn't exist. But I was very interested in this because it was written by a bunch of engineers. Right. And of course, engineers struggle to measure something under observation and qualitatively. It's not their bag, right? So I think safety culture is a huge factor, but I also see this financial and the data side as it's just another avenue. It's another piece of the puzzle. It's not even competing. It's just a different way of looking at it.
And do you think that in terms of getting the 138 deaths per year, that sort of mark, what do you think will get that number down to 0 or 1 or so?
I think actually doing some research on it and finding out what the problem is.
Okay.
So RIDDOR came in 1995, right? The reporting of injuries, diseases, dangerous occurrence regulations. And that says that you have to report stuff, right? The stats on how those things are reported haven't changed, right? So the measurements, the benchmarks haven't changed. They're standard. So if I type in on a RIDDOR, it doesn't matter whether it's someone that's tripped over in work and they sprained their ankle, got taken in an ambulance to hospital and had a look at, or whether it's someone that was stood on top of a building that exploded and killed 5 people, right? It's RIDDOR 1. It's very binary. Do you know what I mean? So that level of detail is not good enough anymore. Again, go back to the Formula One pit stop analogy. Do you think we're measuring the metrics in the Formula One pit stop the same way that we were in 1995, with the same tools, the same mechanisms, the same measurements? Of course not, because it would never get us any better. The detail has to be so much greater, but we're not moving. And I think we rely on the HSE to do this. The HSE are woefully underfunded and now responsible for their own funding under fee for intervention, or a lot of their own funding. They've set up the building regulator. They're just completely snowed under. And meanwhile, industry is driving forward, and we're still relying on the benchmarks of the same ones that we were working on 30 years ago.
And do you think that the sort of general modernization of the industry and that digital maturity, that shift over to, say, design for manufacturing and assembly, that shift towards the world of manufacturing and everything, do you think that will carry the sort of the health and safety maturity of the industry? Do you think that will force it to mature as we move people away from out on site, away from close work of excavators, and we shift people to be in more design and assembly roles?
The whole beauty of manufacturing, when you mention it, is like ISO 9001, isn't it? The quality management standard. And when you look at the standards, like 9001 was always at the top of the tree, and then everything else came off of that. And the whole principle is you control the process, you control the output. If we can control every aspect of the process, then the output, we've got control over the level of quality that we're looking to achieve. And safety, from an ISO standard point of view, let's look at integrated management systems, whatever you want to call it. ISO 45001 sits under 9001 or part of it in IMS. It's this whole process that the principle that if you control every part of the process, then you control the outcome. And a bit like quality, there will come this, when you've got enough data and enough information and enough understanding and enough maturity around the process, there's this balance, isn't there, where you over-egg it and the quality goes through the roof, but the costs go nuts, right? And then you bring the costs down and then the quality goes down. And the idea is that you try to find the right level, and that will be the same way in safety. Do you think we've got the right level of safety now? I go on some sites and they'll go, you've got your 5-point PPE, you've got your 2-hour induction process, you've got all of this stuff just to get through the door. And then you're like, I was only dropping off a parcel, something like that. Can we over-egg safety? Yeah, damn, we can over-egg it. So how do we know we've got it right? We don't. We need to work out what all of the parts of the process are, and then actually have sufficient data to be able to accurately evaluate that. And eventually we will get to the point where we can go, okay, let's tailor this a little bit and work out. And then we go, oh, accidents have gone up. And by the way, I'm not talking someone like Dave fell off the roof the other day. All right, we best put that one back. But I don't know, we've just got this process where you can tell I get very excited about this, can't you? I don't know if everyone else that comes on your podcast is quite as excited about it.
It's what the industry needs. So it's very welcome.
But when you take like a risk assessment, we take the humble risk assessment, right? And everybody does it. Everybody's just like, oh, there's a risk assessment. Can you write a risk assessment for this? It's the only document you need.
Yeah.
All of your other documents in safety, right? They're all right. Your statement of intent You go, oh, we the directors will look after everyone's safety, and they sign it and you stick it on a notice board. I've never seen anyone prosecuted for not having that, ever. Again, shout me up on LinkedIn if you have, but no one's going to prosecute you for that. Oh, God, no, I've said it. Someone will sue me now, won't they? But the requirement is to have a risk assessment. You have to have a safe system of work. You have to have done a risk assessment. And yet so many people pay lip service to it. And actually, it's the biggest thing that we've got, right? Because if I say to a company, what are your biggest hazards? They will go, oh, let me think. You don't have to think. You've written in your risk assessment.
Yeah.
You paid other people money to come in and evaluate this and write it out for you. Why do you have to think? It's there. It's there in the document. The issue is it's never in a usable format. And this is why we've had to digitize it through Intuety, because at the moment, you can have 1,000 risk assessments, each with 30 different hazards, all with a different taxonomy, different categorizations. They're impossible to do anything with. You can't manipulate them or manage them and go, what's our biggest? And then you can cross-reference those hazards that you've got directly across to the control measures. Well, what are control measures? That's your safety spend. But isn't it? If you say, this is my hazard, getting something in my eye. Over here, I need safety goggles for everyone using it. How many staff do you have? 200. It's 200 pairs of safety goggles. That's your safety spend. In theory, that control measure should directly map over to a line on a piece of accounting software somewhere and a spend. It shouldn't be. This is not difficult. You're not telling me they couldn't do this in Formula One, where they just. Do they still just have a bag of bolts where they just randomly pluck out bolts? It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen in any other sector. But for some reason, we've got these documents we put all this money into. Our hazards, the categorization is all over the place. Our control measures are completely left up to really whoever writes the risk assessment, which is bonkers to me that our entire safety spend is just decided upon by what? It's just whoever decided to write in. Right.
And I guess that point around like subjectivity there is an element of subjectivity to the person who's writing that risk assessment on a Monday morning before they go out to site. That, I guess there's almost like a bit of a spectrum in you don't want to go completely standardized because you will then miss some specific risks around specific tasks on a specific site. So you can't go 100% standardized, I'd imagine. But then you don't want to go completely subjective, because then it's just chaos. So what does that balance look like, would you say?
So here's the thing at the moment, and let's plug the continual improvement cycle into it. So what we do is we produce a risk assessment. We identify some hazards, which are observational, right? That is subjective. It's based on my opinion until I'm fed some more information that's taught me something different. And then I produce the control measures. If something goes wrong, the first thing that we do is review the risk assessment. So after an incident, go back and review the risk assessment. It's there in HSG 65, I'm pretty sure, right? We go back down and we review the risk assessment. And then we go, okay, I need some more control measures. And then we write some more control measures, and then we go away and something else happens, and we come back and we write some more control measures. And what you end up with is these building blocks. It's just layering more and more control measures, right? No one ever goes to the bottom and goes, that didn't work, let's get rid of that. And this is the problem with the subjective thing. You talked about toolbox talk for use of ladders. That's a perfectly legitimate control measure. Does it work? Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does it? And then the question is, how much are we spending on that? And what's our ROI on that control measure? What's the efficacy of it? How many accidents does it reduce? How much does it help to improve our safety culture?
Yeah.
We can qualitatively write me a paragraph. It can be completely qualitative, right? We don't have to put numbers on it. Just how much does a toolbox talk on use of ladders improve safety culture? You can't. It's just, and to me, this is where we need to be. And I don't know. I've said this a few times. People look at me like I'm a lunatic, but at the same time, I keep going back to 7% of turnover.
Yeah.
That's what you're spending your money on, and we don't even know if it's working.
Because I guess there's this age-old challenge of you almost can't measure what didn't happen, and you can't measure what you've prevented from occurring. And I guess it's this annoying phrase that you often hear in the world of like technology and everything else, but it probably does apply to health and safety, right?
100%. Jack, you are totally on point, by the way, with all these questions. And I'm sorry if I'm getting too excited, but yeah, leading and lagging indicators, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
again, lagging indicators, accidents. Back in the 1970s, when 2,500 people a year were dying in the UK, and by the way, I understand we had higher risk industries then, but you got to think compared to 138 to a week, that is a ginormous number. You would have had higher risk industries that have been a lot more manufacturing, but still 2,500 fatalities per year, unbelievable. And the way I liken this is that if I do no exercise and I get really out of shape, I could do anything and lose weight. It doesn't matter. I could eat an apple one day a
Yeah,
week
yeah.
and would probably lose weight. I could go for one run. It doesn't mean that I found the secret. Like, it just means that I had an awful lot of weight to shift, right? So I do anything and it works. I observe stuff and it works. And now we're at a point now where we're just, again, paradoxically, we're having too few accidents. Although there's still a lot, we're having too few to actually do any meaningful analysis on it. And the only way we can overcome that is to collaborate and pull all the data together. And at the moment, no one wants to share because the system isn't there to allow them to share. And that's what we're working on, is being able to pull all this data into AI and allow it to share so that you can look at per industry, per business, per region, per country, whatever it is. What are our biggest hazards? What are we spending our money on? What can we do to improve this? For sure, no doubt.
Yeah. Because if you think about the scale of the construction sector and the number of projects on any given Monday morning happening at any given point, there's the amount of risk assessments that will be produced, reviewed, and stored and banked somewhere, and hopefully never having to see the light of day in a legal environment or anything like that. But you really do start to then recognize why natural language processing and artificial intelligence is so important. Because, like you say, it's someone sitting at their computer typing out what they believe or what they observe to be risks related to a task that they're going to do maybe the next week. So it really does present AI as such a critical part in actually allowing us to get that 138 down to zero.
Yes. And the other interesting thing I think that I related to about this data and this reduction in the number of accidents over time is that we have other countries now. We've gone very global just in the past decade. We've gone phenomenally global in terms of reach within safety on LinkedIn and communicating. And we've got ideas coming out of other countries. And there are some countries out there that are producing these phenomenal safety systems, and they're great. Gosh, someone's really going to give me some hate for saying this. But in the UK, we've got 0.41 fatalities per 100,000 people. Some of the countries that are putting this stuff out, they've got like 2.4, 1.2. And these are not small numbers. This isn't, we're not on a sort of linear decline in the number of accidents. It's almost exponential. In short, they're like 15 years behind. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, because I really don't want people to message me hate. But what works in one area in one country isn't going to work in another.
Yeah.
And it's tantamount to me getting a training program and having improvement, and then going to a marathon runner, a professional marathon runner, and then them going to work for Pete.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, exactly.
It's
exactly.
not going to work. And again, this is where the data is so important, but people don't go into that level of detail. And I think this is really where we need to be.
Totally. Wow, Pete, thank you so much. Such an incredible, fascinating conversation around something that is so important. Really appreciate your time. So good to speak to you today.
Cheers, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you very much.